All right, so as you can see, we have a great group of students, and we're very thankful for all the hard work that they do for us throughout the semester. So one more round of applause for all the students. And we're gonna just keep pushing through with the agenda so that we get back on schedule. And now we're gonna hear about resilience planning in the southeastern coastal states. This afternoon's panel will be moderated by George Homewood. George is the planning director for the city of Norfolk. He has more than 30 years of professional planning experience and has been a national leader in promoting a long-term vision of resilience. During his time with Norfolk, the city has updated their comprehensive plan to establish resiliency goals and also adopted a new zoning ordinance, which is at the forefront of addressing flood resilience. Please welcome George Homewood.
Thank you, Angela. It's great to be up here. What's really great is to look out and recognize that I don't recognize many of you. Very often we feel like we're sort of in this echo chamber and we keep going from conference to conference. We see the same people and we're kind of talking to the same people. And that's not the case here, and I'm really thrilled about that. Something else that I've noticed is that Norfolk has been involved in every one of these conferences since they began. And the first one, as I recall, was over at the Sadler Center, the University Union. And at that time, we engaged in really interesting linguistic gymnastics because the terms sea level rise and climate change were just strictly verboten. You could not use those terms. And here we are, the 7th conference, and we're talking about climate change, climate resilience, and sea level rise. So we really have come a very long way in a relatively short period of time, and I think that's a tribute to all of you in this room, and so thank you to you for continuing to push the envelope. So we want to talk a little about resilience planning in the southeastern coastal states. Joe had a great panel this morning about the northeastern states. Why would we split those? Pretty simple, because there's really a fourth P in all of this, and that's politics. And the politics in the Northeast have been, on this issue, have been different than the politics in the Southeast. And so we want to talk a little bit about that today. You know, one of the examples is that in the Northeast, and Virginia is actually a part of it, but the regional greenhouse gas effort has been met with a lot of favor, whereas in the Southeast, it's largely not even talked about. So these are the kinds of differences we want to try to address a little bit today. So real quickly, Norfolk, as I said, we've been a part of every one of these conferences. By the way, the pictures were both taken during Dorian this year. We have been on the forefront of climate change and sea level rise because we have to be. We're the second most at-risk city in North America. Only New Orleans is more at risk. So we have been out front with our partners, our anchor institutions, the city, ODU, others. We've really worked hard to try to be the thought leader in this field. And I think to a great extent we have. A lot of credit goes to our city council because they keep telling us to be bold. And every time we come to something, it's, well, can you be more bold? That, I tell you as a professional planner, is a really, really unusual but a wonderful situation to be in. I will mention to you two things before we get started and I introduce the panel. The first is that, in many ways, the definition of resilience planning is that at its core, that means we're going to value long-term benefit over short-term gain. And that unfortunately seems to be diametrically opposite of what the current regime in Washington would like, is the path they would like us to follow. So that's one of the things, and I mentioned the fourth P is politics. The other thing I'd like to talk a little bit about real quick is that, since we have gotten involved in this number of letters and this alliterative process, let me offer that there's actually 3 E's out there that are involved in planning, and those are engagement, engineering, and equity. And that equity is really, really important to resilience, because it's not about making our communities resistant to whatever the existential threat is. It's about making sure that all members of our communities have the opportunity to be resilient. So with that brief little introduction, I mentioned there's 5 framing questions up there that the panelists will address at some point. And if we don't get them fully addressed, we'll do it in Q&A. So the 3 panelists, and I'm going to introduce them, and then they'll come up in order. First is Dr. Jennifer Giraudo. She is Broward County's Chief Resilience Officer and Director of the Environmental Planning Community Resilience Division, where she oversees countywide climate resiliency initiatives, water resource policy and planning, environmental monitoring, shoreline protection, and marine resources programs. She played a lead role in the organization and advancement of the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, which is a 4-county collaboration focused on regional climate mitigation and adaptation strategies, and she co-leads the Compact's Water Resources and Economic Resilience Work Group. You actually already heard from her in asking a question earlier today. Second is Amanda Martin. She is North Carolina's Deputy Chief Resilience Officer. For the past 3 years, she ran the Southeast Disaster Recovery Partnership, a multi-state public-private initiative where she oversaw capacity building and planning projects in 4 states, conducted applied research, and built a network of recovery and resilience professionals across the Southeast and the Caribbean. Amanda's finishing her PhD in City and Regional Planning from UNC Chapel Hill, where her dissertation examines post-disaster home buyouts in North Carolina from the perspectives of resilience, recovery, and racial justice. And our third and final panelist today is Mark Wilbert, who is the Chief Resilience Officer and Director of Emergency Management for Charleston, South Carolina. As Chief Resilience Officer, his efforts have focused on leading city staff members in developing and implementing a plan for addressing the consequences of flooding and sea level rise in a thriving city of approximately 150,000 residents and almost 7 million visitors annually. Prior to assuming his current role in 2018, he served as the Emergency Management Director for the City of Charleston and has also served on active duty in the United States Coast Guard for 35 years. So with that, Dr. Giraudo.
All right, well, thank you. I really want to acknowledge that I'm thrilled to be here today. I so much appreciate the invitation. I saw the program agenda I've shared with others. I think it's the most rich agenda I've seen in a long time, and so I was really excited. And then, of course, the attendees have made the time here even more valuable. So I hope that what I can share today, I've heard so much great information, it's hard to know how to expand upon that. But what I was asked to talk about is a little bit more in the way of the regional collaboration in Southeast Florida, what that's looked like, how it's allowed us to accelerate our planning efforts. And then I'm going to transition a little bit to how we've utilized the regional framework to advance the very specific initiatives in Broward County, which is where I'm located. And then I'll conclude and kind of integrate how the private sector participation in the last several years, in my opinion, has just been a game changer, and it's been the most rewarding part of the work, I think, and many of us have said the last several years with that level of participation has just been unparalleled. So I can't say too much about any one of those things, but I hope that outside of the presentation we'll be able to talk more if any of those are of particular interest. So just for a little bit of stage setting, if you've not made your way down into Southeast Florida, the counties that I'll be talking about today are Palm Beach to my north, Broward County where I am, Miami-Dade to the south, and then Monroe County is the Florida Keys. We all share a lot in the way of general vulnerabilities to sea level rise and climate impacts, and we also recognize we have a lot of mutual interest in how any of us respond because we share our coral reef system, we share the same drinking water supply, which is the Biscayne Aquifer, we share beaches and shorelines, so any strategies that any of us undertake could either complement or detract from the shoreline resilience of our neighboring communities. We have connected transportation systems. We live and work in an area where you can't really tell the boundary from moving from one community to the other. Very dense development. Broward County is completely built out. We have no place to retreat to. The high ground is maybe 11 feet high. So, you know, we are in an area that's been exposed historically to severe weather, severe rainfall events. We get 58 inches of rainfall a year. And climate pressures clearly exacerbate all of the things that we've organized very extensive systems around, drainage and flood control systems, very advanced emergency management planning in our region for years. But again, we appreciate the severity of the new threat upon us. And while we do talk about planning for future conditions, like many in the room, you can't deny the fact that it's flooding more often, it's flooding in new areas, it's flooding for a longer period of time, and we're starting to see really severe economic consequences associated with some of that, including a couple years ago, we had a rainfall event shut down a Sawgrass Mills major outlet center, cost about $30 million in lost revenues for 3 days. So those are the types of things that really resonate, and that was inland flooding rather than coastal. So again, diversity of impacts, the Sawgrass Mills picture is on the left, and highlighting here whether it's wind-induced, whether it's rainfall-induced, whether it's storm-induced, and whether it's high tide flooding, where we have plenty of case examples across the area that reinforce why action is important. So back in 2009, because we were all starting to, at different levels, begin to talk about how we could more formally integrate sea level rise and climate impacts into our planning and policies. We all had different task forces, different sea level rise work groups. We had different data and techniques that were being employed, and it became quite clear that we're in a fairly small geographic area in the end. You can travel from one end to the other end in 3 to 4 hours, and yet we were all over the place as it related to how we were mapping the sea level rise projections that we were using and a lot of different assumptions. And we were tapping all the same individuals across a large landscape to help our individual efforts. And so the leadership, our county commissioners, recognize that there'd be a lot of value in coming together, trying to develop baseline planning conditions, work together on climate policy at state and federal levels, a need to develop a regional action plan, a framework because of all the mutual interest and infrastructure that I shared. And then they agreed that we ought to be coming together on an annual basis and really assessing, what's happening in the community, what's the type of progress that's taking place, and how do we need to, organize differently or do better, and what's the next priority. So in 2010, we had formalized the 4-county Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, and we've now celebrated 10 years of continuous voluntary commitment among our 4 counties. The collaborative, while it started with the 4 counties, we clearly have a lot of municipal engagement. The Nature Conservancy, our Water Management District, our regional planning councils are all ex officio participants. And as you'll see, we've identified additional focal areas and target partners over the years. Highlighted here are some of the principal work products, including first, we did develop a 5-year regional plan. It had 110 recommendations. We updated that, so we've now developed and adopted twice a regional action plan that, again, kind of guides how we work, but it doesn't displace all of our local planning documents. We still have our county and municipal action plans. We developed a regional sea level rise projection, a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory to help prioritize, where we need to make our emissions reductions investments. We developed regional vulnerability mapping. Today we hold 3 to 4 workshops a year focused on priority objectives where we bring together diverse audiences, including the consultant engineers who work in our communities, our municipal partners, housing, transportation, natural systems, depending on the subject, energy, facilities people, procurement. How do you effectuate what we need to happen through our procurement processes, and how can we use piggyback agreements and so forth. So just a whole host of topics that we try to tackle, bring together groups, and as I said, try to accelerate implementation. And then we continue to hold our annual summits. I should have updated the graphic with a 2019. We're holding our 11th annual summit in Key West on December 3rd to 5th, and hopefully we'll see some of you there. There are worse places to be than Key West in December. So one of the most significant work products that has come through our collaborative process is the development of the Southeast Florida Regional Sea Level Rise Projection. This is our second projection that has been collectively adopted by all 4 of the counties and over half of the cities in our 4-county planning area. It's the basis for all adaptation planning by any consultant who's doing any work in the region. And at the summit, we'll be sharing our third update. I'll give you a sneak peek. We're going to be replacing the Army Corps high curve as our upper curve with the NOAA intermediate high, similar to what we've heard shared today. And we'll be looking at an upper boundary of 40 inches in 2070, and we carry the projection out to 2120. And so we'll be working through the adoption on that. I wanted to share here with regards to the action plan what ended up being a relatively significant turning point in the last couple years, as I indicated, in the private sector engagement. So we were at a point where we recognized that we were able to advance a lot of planning, but it really wasn't being implemented. I mean, we were going to have to get into the regulatory process, and we knew that private sector participation was going to be very fundamental to that. And we reached out and started the conversation about economic resilience. They actually said, "What took you so long?" That's interesting because we'd been having the conversation for some time, but I don't think that they were ready. But we were starting to see, again, very severe impacts, bond initiatives that were starting to take up issues of adaptation, and there were more and more conversations being raised about bond rating, the cost of flood insurance, and quiet conversations. What's the financial prospect for some of the development and investors that are needed in the area? So a lot of interest at that particular time, and they were very committed to working with us as part of our collaborative. So at the 2017 summit that was hosted by Broward County, we actually jointly hosted that with our business community. We branded it the Business of Resilience. We celebrated with the statement on economic resilience, a statement of collaboration. You can see a number of the entities that signed on. They were including our most prominent business groups, the Broward Workshop, the Beacon Council in Miami-Dade, our large chambers of commerce, our regional planning councils, economic development groups, et cetera. One of the real valuable turning points in all of this was that the business community began not to be the audience, but they actually ended up becoming the host. And who they can get into the room is very different from the entities that local government can draw. And in one of the early events that they organized, we had the editorial writer for the Sun Sentinel. And she left determined that this needed to be a more prominent conversation. We've been challenged in thinking, how can we communicate better? Because it seems like we do it exhaustively, and yet nobody's ever heard of the work or the needs. It's unfamiliar. So where do people go for the information? Well, they go to the online, typically now, news outlets. So it's the Sun Sentinel, the Palm Beach Post, the Miami Herald. They're listening to WLRN. So the business leadership led to the 4 media outlets partnering in what's now called the Invading Seas. It was an award-winning, breaking ground in terms of collaboration in the news outlet on climate conversations. They also aided in supporting an economic resilience work group. We've been pushing very hard for 10 years, investment by the Army Corps of Engineers in the Central South Florida Flood Control Project. Well, here's our business leadership with Colonel Kelly, and a very high-profile meeting that was held also involving our state, and we're trying to organize support there. Again, an influence that they have that we've not been able to exert effectively in this period of 10 years, and understand all of our resilience efforts are tied to this regional system. Locally, though, we're doing a lot, and we've been trying to demonstrate how much we're leveraging. So we're not just moving forward with empty hands. As an example of what's taking place in Broward County, like many, we've amended our comprehensive plan. We've identified priority planning areas. These are areas, if there's a land use amendment, we know it's at risk to flooding, it gets held to a higher level of review, not only in terms of the project and the standards for the project, but what is the city doing to organize the rest of its infrastructure planning to support the resilience so you can actually gain access and utilize that investment. We've adopted future conditions map series as part of our design standards for the county, and I know I'm running short, so I'm going to run through these really quick. We've updated our drainage requirements for all new development and major redevelopment. We've modeled a change in the groundwater table to account for 2 feet of sea level rise. So now all drainage systems and all surface water management systems have to be designed to account for that loss of soil storage in order to ensure drainage and flood protection through the duration of the project. We also increased the wet season condition that's modeled in that scenario. That was adopted and implemented in 2017. We're working with our cities, 10 cities in one of our water districts, on updating our flood control map. It is not the FEMA flood elevation that's used for insurance, but rather this is a higher standard that is predictive of future conditions. We're embedding 2 feet of sea level rise and an increase in rainfall intensity. We're updating our IDF curves, the intensity, duration, frequency rainfall events for future conditions. And we are finalizing the modeling on this that we expect to be completed by the end of the year. We're tying in substantially community rating system credits that are associated with planning to higher standards, planning for sea level rise. You can see the level of detail that we're bringing to the maps in order to support local conditions, and as I said, cost share funding coming from a number of entities so that we're all buying in and recognizing that we're going to derive immediate short-term benefits in the insurance market and in our flood risk market, not just providing flood protection and the benefits that are realized 60 years later. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers, or DID, to model the increase in flood elevation or water elevation with the combined impacts of 2 feet sea level rise, high tides, and high frequency storm surge. We're going through the adoption process currently. We expect, we're in the final process of public hearing, expect this to be adopted countywide by the end of this calendar year. It will establish a consistent seawall standard across all 12 of our coastal cities and require this new standard be met at 5 feet NAVD for all new construction, major restoration, and at the time at which a property is cited as being the source of tidal water trespass onto adjacent properties, whether that be public or private. We're also defining tidal flooding as a public nuisance that requires remedy. As you can see, there's a lot that's happening across the counties and regionally, but I'll acknowledge that while we work towards addressing the design standards for future condition, and we're seeing individual projects take place, we haven't had a coordinated plan. Nothing that says collectively when we make all these investments, what's the benefit derived, nor have we done anything to address flood risk really for all of the existing infrastructure. So the business community has been adamant that they feel quite deeply that we need to have a plan that is that shows space. It has spatial and temporal elements. That it's something that we can communicate to the risk rating agencies about in terms of if we make these improvements, what's the defined level of risk and exposure that's addressed, how do we quantify that, and ensure that all the investment community is able to see the performance of this work realized, in the types of tools that they're already accustomed to utilizing, the risk analytics that come from those large companies. So, as a function of their support, we are moving forward now with a countywide plan. We have it in our capital budget, quite sizable, the investment to set the stage for a plan that will identify a plan strategy for infrastructure, capital improvements focused on resilience, probably a multi-decade plan, and then something that we can finance with the planning level cost estimates. So we'll be working towards that. So I'll conclude in just noting that like many, we've seen the increase in severity of flood risk in our coastal and inland environments. I think that we had been able to make steady progress in advancing those, largely because the business community appreciated that absent certain investments, it was going to get harder to do business in this area. But it is the conversation about what's happening in short-term investment that's really driving a more aggressive program today. And we were tardy, I think, in talking about short-term economics and the investment decisions that are being made today based upon longer-term risk perception. And we were focused too severely on conditions that were apt to be expected in 50, 60 years. We need to make it relevant to our community today. Business communities aided us in having that conversation, and we still recognize, though, that with all that happens locally and regionally, our state and federal partners end up needing to be a more prominent partner in our planning, and we're just starting to see the tide turn on that one with our new governor, who has accepted a keynote spot at our summit this year, first time in 10 years. So despite the progressive nature of local politics at the state level, it's not where it's needed to be, but seems to be on a better path today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Martin. I'm a Deputy Chief Resilience Officer at the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. I have the distinct honor of following that incredible presentation. Very inspiring about all the work that you all are doing. I am going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk less in detail about, I'll tell you some of the individual efforts that are underway in North Carolina. I'm not going to talk in too much detail about those, and instead I'm going to share some of the lessons learned so far regarding planning, partnership, and paying for it all. So if you want more detail about what specifically we're doing, I'm happy to answer questions. You can come find me. So I've been in this role for about 6 months now. We have a small resilience team, 3 people, and we are just starting to chart our way. We were hired without job descriptions, so we've had an interesting experience trying to lay some groundwork and set up expectations of what we'll be doing, and that's some of what I'll talk about today. But just before I start talking about the work that North Carolina is doing, I want to paint the picture of the impacts that we're seeing in North Carolina of climate change and of severe weather. So in 2016, we had Hurricane Matthew, which devastated eastern North Carolina. And the impact that we saw, very similar to the impact that we saw in 1999 with Hurricane Floyd, is that we have a large coastal storm, but the real devastating damage happens because the storm comes and it parks over our state. And it rains and rains and rains, and our river basins fill, and then maybe the storm moves on, but all that water trickles down through the watershed into some of our larger rivers, and that's where we see our worst flooding. So it might happen 3 to 7 days after the storm makes landfall. We start to see these communities in our eastern coastal plains have rising floodwater, and it's really... It's just heartbreaking to watch it happen on TV because it's happening in slow motion where people under blue skies are watching water inch up into their communities. So that was 2016 and 2017. We were largely spared by Hurricane Michael, but it did cause some infrastructure damage in the state after wreaking havoc on Florida. And then in 2018, we had Hurricane Florence, which had largely the same pattern of impact as Hurricane Matthew. And so as a result, we saw many communities that had just started to recover, with some homes rebuilt from Hurricane Matthew, some not, completely reflooded. And so this was a major blow to the confidence of residents and leaders in that area of our ability to be resilient and to recover, and what recovery even really looks like for our state. Finally, we had Hurricane Dorian this year, 2019, and it had a very concentrated geographically speaking effect, largely on Ocracoke Island, where in many ways we are fortunate that effect was limited in the area that it affected, but the actual devastation on the island presents a real challenge for long-term recovery because basically everybody on the island had sustained damage to their homes. And there are a lot of logistical challenges of trying to get, say, debris off of an island and volunteer workers onto an island where there's not much spare housing. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at. Of course, we also have sea level rise, we have wildfire risk, and we have extreme heat risk. And those are all on the top of our minds as climate hazards as well. So what are we doing in North Carolina? I'm going to talk about a few different initiatives that we have going on. The first comes from Executive Order 80. This is our Governor Cooper, the state of North Carolina's commitment to address climate change. And it addresses both climate change mitigation and adaptation, and it calls for the development of a risk and resiliency plan for the state. And so it was Rhode Island who said they had 9 months to do their plan. So we have 18 months, but it was both a clean energy plan and a risk and resilience plan. So we're in the process of developing that, largely walking through climate change, kind of typical climate change planning pattern where we're looking at vulnerabilities. We're getting a great update to our science that we have on impacts that we're expecting for the state, and then walking through our cabinet agencies to try to evaluate their own area of expertise and their own resources and assets and services to better understand how they'll be impacted by climate change. We also have the State Disaster Recovery Task Force, and that's a big part of my work as I staff this task force. It comes out of our Department of Emergency Management. It's a large task force that everybody on the task force has some kind of a role in disaster recovery. So it might be state agencies, mostly state agencies and nonprofits. And the objective of the task force is to better coordinate for disaster recovery. And what we've done is we've taken that task force and we've given them some additional roles. So we convene in subcommittees. They're called recovery support functions because it's emergency management, but I'll just call them subcommittees. And we have one for housing, environmental preservation, economic development, health, you name it. We've covered the gamut of areas in which public policy interfaces with disaster recovery. And so the people on these subcommittees are developing recommendations to improve our current disaster recoveries, of which you understand now we have basically 4 ongoing active recoveries in the state, to help prepare our state for future disaster recovery. So what kinds of capacities do we want to have in place so that next time we can recover in a more efficient or effective or fair way? And then the third piece is to address resilience. And so this is where the scope of work for this task force broadens up. And they're starting to think about how they plug into other processes that are going on at the state level, and what kinds of recommendations they would have to advance the state's resilience in the area of their subcommittee. We have a new Office of Recovery and Resilience, which is where I work. It was established by the legislature a little over a year ago. It was established to spend our CDBG DR funds, so Community Development Block Grants for Disaster Recovery, to create more of to create capacity in the state in its own office to administer these funds, which are very complex to administer. And that's where this small resiliency team fits in. So I think we have 60 staff members, and we have 57 people spending CDBG-DR and 3 people doing resilience. So I'm one of those lucky 3 people. We have also through the Office of Recovery and Resilience, which we call NCORE, we have CDBG mitigation funding. So this is a new type of funding coming from HUD. It's similar to their other block grant programs, except this funding is focused on mitigation, so hazard mitigation, not climate change mitigation. And we just put out a draft action plan, so we'll wait and see what kinds of comments we get back about it. But it looks like our use of these funds, it's $168 million, is largely going to focus on housing resilience in the state. So buying out people from vulnerable areas and building new housing that is in safer places. We have an affordable housing crisis that was made worse by these hurricanes in eastern North Carolina. There's just no housing market to begin with. So a lot of housing with deferred maintenance and a limited supply to begin with. And then these hurricanes have come through and wiped out some portion of that. Our staff, the resilience staff, is working on a quick start guide for local government, which is intended to be a resource for those local governments that are interested in doing something related to resilience, but they're not really sure what resilience is or what that looks like or what they might do. And this comes from some of the outreach that we've done in conjunction with the executive order, where we hear from local governments that they're interested in resilience, they want to do the messaging themselves, they don't want the state to come in and say what to do, but they do need some kind of resource. And I think this is common in other states where there are a lot of rural communities that have relatively low municipal capacity, where you have one person who might be playing a lot of roles for that particular town. They don't have their own planner, for example. And so we're developing some guidance for that audience in how they can think about resilience, what resilience might mean to them, what might be some things that they could do to incorporate resilience into their everyday activities without sort of calling it out as a special thing that they're doing, and then also what they could be doing if they do want to call it out as a special thing and have some kind of a resilience initiative or a resilience plan in their town. These are some steps that they might take. And our 3-person staff, to the maximum extent possible, are available for technical assistance to those local governments that want to use that as a resource. And then finally, we have our state hazard mitigation plan update. And if any of you are familiar with the hazard mitigation plan update cycle, you know that means that you're basically always in some stage of updating your plan or publishing it. So our last one was adopted in 2018, which means we have to start the next cycle. And this time, we have an opportunity through some of these other initiatives to open the conversation about how we can think about hazard mitigation in a more holistic way. What are some new data sources we could be using? What are some other strategies we might be using? How could we improve its value to the state? So those are some things that North Carolina is working on. And again, if you have questions about them, I'm happy to answer. But what I'm going to do is share a little bit of insight about what we've learned so far in 6 months of the resilience team, and also a little bit that comes from the rest of my background, which I'm a planner. So as this is my favorite comic. You all probably don't know me, but I use it in a lot of my presentations. That's why I felt like I could use it today. But perspective really matters when we talk about resilience, and I'm sure many of you have come across this when people ask you, well, what do you really mean by resilience? Or it just becomes clear that they're talking about something kind of different from what you have in mind. And so a big piece that we've learned is to engage that question, and we don't necessarily have to answer it all the time. For example, some people think of resilience really as hazard mitigation, like they're kind of synonyms for the same thing. Resilience just sounds nice. And what we try to communicate with them is that, well, resilience is actually a little bit bigger than hazard mitigation. It's also about the connections between the different systems that help our communities and our states function. Hazard mitigation is a really important part of keeping those systems going. So you always kind of share that their perspective on resilience is important, unless it's like way off base, but make sure to highlight that what they have in mind probably is relevant, and then to share our perspective on what we're thinking about for resilience. Similarly, in the world, we work in a lot of very poor communities that have been impacted by these storms. And people often think about resilience in a more social services kind of context. So people's resilience to withstand any kind of trauma or household issue that they're facing, poverty. And what I would say to you all, because I think you all are probably like me, have some kind of an infrastructure or planning approach to things, is that actually while we might not be talking about, for example, when I say work for the Office of Recovery and Resiliency, some people ask if that's like addiction recovery and resiliency, because those are also common words in their world as well. But we know that the impact of severe weather, of climate change, isn't just a function of physical exposure to those impacts. It's also our ability to cope. And our ability to cope depends on our economic condition, our health, our community ties, our relationships, and that's true at the household scale. It's also true at the community scale. And so I'd encourage all of us, if you come across that kind of a definition of resilience and it seems like you're like, how do I bridge this conversation? Make sure that to yourself, you're reminding yourself that actually those parts are very important to our overall resilience, because we are going to have these impacts and we do need to have that communal strength to be able to cope with their impacts. So I'm going to make 3 main points today. I'm a fan of relatively simple presentations. These points are all about planning, partnership, and paying for it all. My first point is to find the people in the equation. And this comes, again, because I am a planner and I work with a lot of people who talk about infrastructure, and infrastructure is a very important piece. But we live in a world where people think about people, where the way that we communicate about risk needs to engage wherever those people are. So, and this is part of our commitment to equity, is to make sure that we have found the people and those people that we might not have immediately thought of, and we've included them in our planning process. So find and center the people. Second, build capacity through partners. This is the partnership piece. So we are a 3-person staff, but what we are doing is building relationships with a lot of other agencies, nonprofits, leaders, legislators, to build our collective capacity to address climate change. And if I say one thing about tricky politics of resilience, it's that the more people we have in the state who are thinking about resilience, whether or not it is preceded by the term climate change, the better. Because then it makes it harder to sort of erase the issue off the books. If an election comes and an administration turns over, you want to make sure you still have all of your old partners working on this issue. I'll say very briefly, engaging the private sector. I've worked more in engaging small businesses, and what I would say is, coming from government, that we often don't know how to do that. And that engaging small businesses just on their own terms sometimes is very difficult, because those business owners are busy running their business, and they don't have time to take out of their day and out of their revenue stream to talk with you. But to go for industry associations, chambers of commerce, other kinds of people whose job it is to represent small businesses. And go talk with them, because often they're very concerned about the same issues that you are. They're just thinking about it in different ways. So make sure to show up at their events. Don't just invite them to your events. Learn how they're understanding these issues, what language they speak. And then finally, about paying for it all, know what you want to fund. And this is a lesson learned for us in these first 6 months of these resilience positions, is that funding opportunities are irregular, they can be surprising. It might be, so we've had a number of disasters, and disasters do open up funding opportunities, but also it might be some legislator comes to your office and says, hey, I'm writing this bill. Does it speak to you? Is there anything you would want to include in it? And you're like, wait, yes, but what is it? So it's very difficult to respond to opportunities for funding, or opportunities generally, if you don't have a sense of what your priorities are. And so that's something that we're actively working on in my office, is to better articulate and agree upon what our priorities are, so that when those opportunities come, we're able to push forward what we are confident is the best solution for us. So that's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Mark Rolbert. I'm with the City of Charleston. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer there, and I would first like to thank the Virginia Coastal Policy Center for having me here today. This is great. Where I'm from, I'm one of one, and it gets a little lonely there. I just spent a wonderful week traveling through the UK as part of a U.S. delegation on resilience, and it was with all CROs from around the Southeast, and many of the colleagues from the folks here. It was Amanda's colleague and a close colleague of Jennifer's as well. It was the best week of my life, because we were all talking the same thing. So today what I'd like to do with you is share a little bit about, so we're a small city, a small southern historic city, and we are currently under accelerating threat. When I got up this morning, we set a new record. As of today, we've been setting records since the end of October. Since the beginning of October. We're 77 coastal flood events this morning. The previous record was 58 in 2015, and we will set more records tomorrow and the day after. So we will continue to set those records. We're on track to break where we thought we were going to be in 2050. As I said, I don't have a county CRO like Jennifer. And we, as a state, don't have a state CRO, and I believe I'm the only one in the state. Our recent floodwater commission that just reported out last week, we'll see where that takes us statewide, and I think the state of South Carolina is beginning to move in this direction. So all of you today have been very inspiring and very encouraging. So what you see up here today is, so how did we do this? So back in 2015, the mayor called me and he said, hey, what are we going to do about this? And I said, well, we can do it if you want to do it. And I said, but the first thing you need from a military guy of 35 years, you got to have a strategy. And after you have a strategy, then you got to put a plan together, and then you get a tactical plan together, and then you're going to go out and do it, right? He said, let's do it. So that's kind of what I'm going to kind of give to you today, of how we've been doing this in a city that's kind of been approaching it alone for the most part. So the first thing we had, you've heard a lot about capacity today, and that's no different in the city of Charleston. It's a small city, capacity is there. So we really had to devise a whole city approach to this. So every department in the city is part of this. And what we did is we broke it down into different components. I called them critical pathways. Somebody in the mayor's office didn't like that, so he took it out of there and put components in. But I think really they're critical pathways to be able to get from where you start to where you finish. So this is, a whole city approach. As I said before, obviously the resources make sense to you all. Land use, I think, is our biggest challenge, and I would argue that's the biggest challenge of probably everybody in the room. We know we got to fix the past, but what are we going to do about the future? We can't screw that up because we can't afford to fix the past. So we've got to get that land use piece right. And again, what I heard today was really encouraging. Governance piece, you've heard a lot about CRS, you've heard a lot about stormwater regs. We've got a really good team digging into all those, and I won't repeat all the things you've heard today, but all of them are very familiar about the same types of things that we're doing. Infrastructure, I'll talk a little bit more about that. I know there's a lot of discussion in here about that. And then outreach. If we're not getting out and telling our story, and that was probably our biggest problem early on, as we were kind of keeping this all inside and moving around, and now we're just out there talking to everybody about it. George asked the question about the center of gravity for resilience, and I would argue that the center of gravity for resilience is right at the center of those 5 components right there. And in our case, we have a strong mayor form of government, and then you've got to have somebody like a CRO to kind of pull all this together. The other 2 would be you've got to have a city council that supports this. Without a city council, you really can't get anywhere. Because all the funding is going to come through them to move things along, as well as approve ordinances and regulations. So from a city perspective, they've got to be allies. But then the last one is the public. If you don't have the public on your side, this isn't really going anywhere. We're single-member districts. We've got 12 council members. So we just had an election, and the public spoke, and we've lost the number of council members who maybe weren't all that supportive of these types of initiatives, because our public is very supportive of these types of initiatives, very supportive. So I would say, if you have 3 of the 4, you're going to be partially successful, but if you get 4 of those 4 working for you and get them all aligned, you're probably going to really be successful. I don't know how many of you have ever been to our city chambers. They're very old. I think they might be the oldest continuous city chambers in the country. They're small. And if we have a pretty popular issue, we can pack the city chambers to the point where we've got people waiting outside to get in and talk to us. So we can move things by getting, if the public gets involved. So what did we do? We took these 5 critical components, and this is, again, and those of you in city government know this, we have 150,000 residents, so I have 150,000 constituents who like to call on the phone every day. So, and the hard part for me, coming from the federal government, where I really felt I was connected to the community. The Coast Guard has a history of feeling like they're connected to the community. I'm really connected now, okay? And we had a mayor previous to our current mayor who was in office for 40 years. He stayed in office for 40 years because he was very connected to the community. And that's the expectation that our constituents have. So we are there. So one of the things they wanted to know was, because they want to know what you're doing, right? And they want to know, what are you doing for them and how is it progressing? So these are the initiatives. So I'll just very quickly, those 5 components, we broke it down into 67 initiatives. We outlined all the initiatives. We assigned a city leader to them. We update them on a regular basis, and they're online for our citizens to see. They can see what initiatives or progress is being made on, which ones are on hold, which ones aren't moving yet. In addition to that, and this is something we just started, we have, on a monthly basis, we pull all the departments' heads in, we make them sit on a big, long table, and then we have key metrics that they're now reporting on based on these initiatives to the mayor, to the senior staff, based on key performance initiatives out of these 67 initiatives you see here. And it's working really well. It's how do you get the whole city involved in doing resilience work, because we really have a bias for action right now. George mentioned planning fatigue. I would say we're planning sick. If you talk to our city council members, they really don't want to hear a lot more about planning. They want to know, what are you doing? Tell me what you're doing. Tell me what projects we're getting done. Tell me what things you're doing to move this forward. And that's what we want to demonstrate to our citizens as well. For those of you that in this world, you'll probably laugh at this, but the question I hate the worst, and I seem to get the most, is when are you going to finish this work and how much is it going to cost, okay? And of course, there's no answer to either one of those, because this is going to go on forever and the cost will go on forever. But they want to know, how much is it going to cost and when are you going to finish it? So this is my attempt to be able to show them that, yep, we are moving forward on this. Talking about planning, this is 2 years, 2.5 years worth of work that we've had going on in the city. The total, I added it up, the total value of this is a little bit over $4 million that we have currently invested in planning efforts. The good thing is all of these, except for one, are going to finish up at least to the point where we can use them very early next year, which is really exciting for us. So if you look at our Dutch dialogues, I don't know how many of you are aware of what that process is. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. But it really brought the community together around this issue. But the Dutch dialogues, and one of the members from the team, Dale, is here with us today. It was tied a lot to our all hazards vulnerability and risk assessment, which Ken from the team is here today. And so they work closely together. We had people from both teams in the room working together. And I'll jump down to number 4. We too have an Army Corps 3x3 flood protection study going on that we're working with. We're just about to get to tentative selective plan. We had the Army Corps people in the room at the same time working. And then you jump to number 5, and David's here with us, our stormwater program management prioritization tool for all our stormwater plans. They were in the room working as well. So as all these plans are being put together to pull us to the end of 2019 into 2020 as we get ready to move out on action, all of those people were working in the room together. I left the hazard mitigation plan off because I just didn't have the heart to push that one through. We actually got federal funding sitting on the shelf for it, but I just can't ask the staff to do anything more until we finish these other things up. They're just tired of seeing me. I keep saying I'm going to get an arrow through my chest. At the end of all this, though, our comprehensive plan rewrite kicks off, and George probably doesn't know it, but about 3 years ago he visited Charleston, and he was really inspirational about how you take all of this and get it into the new comprehensive plan. So we hope to be able to emulate a lot what Norfolk's doing. And the other thing I want to add about this planning business, and we talk a lot about infrastructure, and this is really me really going off the rails a little bit. These plans are really about a vision for the future too, because we at the local level have got to be honest, and we've got to be fully transparent with our constituents. We're not going to build our way out of this. There's not enough money. There's just isn't. And I'm sorry, I keep doing that. There just isn't enough money to build ourselves out of this. So what are we going to do in the future? All of these plans, when we begin to put them together, that's going to help guide that discussion as we move forward. And again, I was just over in the UK. They're talking a lot about this. They don't have the money to fund all of this and projects, so they're talking about other ways that they're going to do that. The folks at the local level are going to have to start having this discussion. And all of these plans, when they're finished, are really going to help us do this. Another thing that it does for us, and again, down at what I call the tactical level, day to day, every day, the 78th flooding event that we'll have tomorrow morning at about 9:30, we need to make sure that our public safety people, when it comes to budget prioritizing, that they have the right assets that they need. That's a big chunk of a city's budget. It's a huge chunk. Do they have the right vehicles? Do they have enough people? Does our fire department have the right vehicles to be able to respond to fires and getting people out of buildings when it floods. So at the tactical level, it's a lot more than building. It's a lot more being able to respond for the next 10 or 15 years, where we're going to have to do this until we get some of that building done or into the future. So it's all of that for us in the local community. I heard a lot about building public buildings, and I can't remember, it was Virginia that was talking about it, I know Rhode Island was talking about it, I know Jennifer's talking about it. That's awesome. I got to take that stuff back and talk about that, because we're not quite there yet where we're committed to that. Although we do have guidelines that we're doing in the city, we certainly don't have them in the state or beyond. On to partnerships. George asked me to talk a little bit about partnerships. This was our real first step into partnerships. I'll just admit it, but it was a great step. So the Dutch Dialogues process that came to Charleston, and like I said, Dale's in the back of the room, we talked about, it took us about a year and a half. Got a great trip to the Netherlands out of it, though, so I just want to say that. And then we had the team come in and work with us, and it was a great opportunity. But the important point of this slide is it was led by community financing, okay? The city did put some money in, but the bigger chunk of money came from financing from nonprofit organizations, as well as some of our utilities. That's really the first time that's happened in our city. Our historic Charleston Foundation, Charleston, as many of you know, is a very historic city. They actually took the lead with us in bringing this effort to town. It was a lot of work to pull the financing together, but it worked out really good. I think we've got a member from the American Flood Coalition who helped us with that. Charleston Water Systems, our university, our medical university, which is right at the worst spot in the city, okay? It can't be any worse than where they are when it comes to flooding. And they certainly have been great partners, the Nature Conservancy. So it's really, this was a good first effort at getting that partnership thing going, and I think it's gonna kind of lead us into the future. This moved along, sounds a little bit, but certainly not on the scale of what we just heard from Boston. I just want to talk about how hard it is to do work, and because I want to get on to the paying for it piece. Charleston, as you know, is a very, very old city, not unlike many cities that you all come from, or at least are responsible for. We have to go down 140 feet before we can go horizontal to get water out of our peninsula. That's not cheap, okay? So if you're going to drain water out of the peninsula, you're tunneling down, then going horizontally. What you see here is probably one of the biggest projects we've done, but it will not be the biggest or the most expensive. That big hole in the ground right there, that's where we're going to put a big pump station, and all the water from a giant basin there called the Spring Fishburne Drainage Basin is actually going to drain into that, and then we're going to pump it out. I always love to show this picture because I love these guys. They spend like their whole life underground. I don't know how they do it, but that's the tunneling machine that goes underground. It just follows down. And when I was over in London, they've got the same thing going on under the river over there to rebuild their sewer system. It's really interesting to watch. So we're spending a lot of money for a small city. This is our current spend rate right now on capital investment just on these issues between 1990 and 2020. As I said, our previous mayor and certainly our current mayor, our previous mayor was very, very, very focused on drainage improvements because we knew we were having a lot of difficulty. Our current mayor has kept that up. But $235 million for a small city in that period of time is a lot of money. Most of that did come from the city taxpayers or the city ratepayers. We are continue to work on that. As you can imagine, it becomes troublesome. It's difficult to keep projects on budget, and we've been having some trouble of late, but we're going to get through it. And that $7.1 million for the maintenance budget, that's likely to go up. We've just redoubled our efforts in terms of maintenance to see if we can keep things working well for a little bit longer. And then I just wanted to end with this. I've heard a lot of talk today about, how do you put money together? Our previous stormwater director, she used to carry this slide around with her everywhere she went. For that project I showed you there, this is kind of the capital stack that she was able to put together. And this was back in 1990. We've updated some of the things here. But you can see just how complicated that is. And we go back again to that capacity piece. There was nobody in the city to do this. One of the things that we did as soon as my position was created is we created like 3 other positions. The second position created in the city was a grant writer just for this, okay? Because we recognized we've got to move forward and do that. But you can see all of the different means of funding to get one project done. And I can even add to this today the CDBGR money that everybody in the room's talking about, because the plans are starting to come out. We're hopeful for about $16 million of that for a couple of projects. And then just yesterday, when we got here, the governor came out and put $10 million in the budget for a project in Charleston that's going to accelerate relief for our medical district 20 years ahead of where it will if we have to wait for the other stuff. So we're beginning, you know how you get the governor to do that is you take him down in the tunnel. Okay, and that's what the mayor did. He took him down to the tunnel, drug him underneath, and said, "This is where it stops unless you give me enough money to finish this." So it went into his budget. Whether it survives the budget or not, we'll have to wait and see. That's that political thing that George, I think, was talking about, the politics thing. We'll see where it goes. But I hope, and to some degree, I was able to share with you a little bit of how small cities, really kind of limited. I think the piece that we don't have going yet, and it's something that over the next year or so I think we really need to focus on, is how do we get the business community really, really involved. And I picked some things up here today that I've already been texting the mayor just sitting here. So hopefully we'll do that. And in a couple of years, we'll come back and show you what we got right. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Dale, you and I are going to have a conversation, because Norfolk had a Dutch dialogues, and I didn't get a trip to the Netherlands. So anyway, I hope you all realize what we tried to do. We tried to give you a perspective from the state level, from a regional level, and from a local level. We tried to talk about not only the traditional coastal flooding, and by the way, I don't know if you all have noticed, but the folks here at the Coastal Policy Clinic have arranged for us to have a coastal flooding event today. So, that's just a bonus. What we've tried to do is give you sort of the depth and breadth of how we think about coastal resilience. We got about 5-7 minutes to get some questions in. And you really want to ask questions, because otherwise I'm just going to talk, and those people who know me know that that's not a good thing. So are there any questions out there? I see one hand.
All right, hi. Ryan Franklin again. My question is, if each of you can talk about whether managed retreat is in the conversation as an option, and if it is, whether it's gaining ground, what the resistance is like, kind of on the front lines of what your experience has been like with that.
Who wants to go first?
You do.
I do? So we've already started some managed retreat. We, not to the extent certainly that Amanda's had, but within the city, we've already begun buying out some homes in areas that are severely flooded, repetitive flooding areas. In terms of an option, a long-term option, we're not there to have that conversation yet. But as I said earlier, those are going to have to be some of the things we talk about once all of these planning documents get done, because that's going to be a really difficult conversation. So we're doing it. We're doing it where it absolutely is essential, makes sense to do. In terms of long-term, looking out 50, 70, 90 years, which is what I want to do, because I think that's going to be interesting, we've not yet begun that conversation.
I can add to that. So something interesting is that we do hear a lot of discussion about managed retreat, and it seems to always refer to ocean-facing communities. But actually, North Carolina's been buying out residences for over 20 years. So we bought out 5,000 properties after Hurricane Floyd and Fran in 1999 and 96, respectively. And we are buying out several thousand more as a result of having funding from our recent disasters. So while for some reason the managed retreat conversation seems to happen in parallel to some of the conversation about inland buyouts, that is essentially what we're doing. And my concern about the way that our policy landscape has provided us with opportunity to do retreat, which is basically through individual property buyouts, is that we aren't addressing community level systems. So town governments that will not be fiscally sound, or social networks that support people's day-to-day lives. We have no policy means or few examples of doing whole community relocation, although it has been done. But I would just add that that is my concern about the way that we are approaching managed retreat or the removal of development in risky areas.
It's a question that we're asked regularly, and one that I will acknowledge that we're really not prepared to have. And my personal perspective is that I don't anticipate having a plan where we're just like prepared to march people from one area to another. I expect rather that things like flood insurance will change affordability and will drive individual investment decisions, and that will drive property values, and that will make other opportunities for buyouts when they might, other mechanisms for acquisition. I think it's going to be less strategic, but kind of more of a dribble, except for when we have major events, and then of course, then we need to be prepared to acknowledge where we want to reinvest and where we need to kind of step back from the shoreline a little bit further. So I think we recognize that, but there is no map. The other thing that I would say is that in looking at the groundwater table issue, I feel strongly that we can keep up with 2 and even 3 feet of sea level rise, but in our modeling with the USGS, that there are neighborhoods, areas where you'd have to pump 6,000 cubic feet per second always in order to maintain today's groundwater table in certain areas, and where would you put the water? So those are going to have to be areas, and I think our plan that we're getting ready to embark upon will demonstrate the cost of the necessary capital improvements that would be needed relative to the benefits, and those might be areas that, again, we just appreciate that with time, those might be targeted areas for larger, water management areas. We might be able to utilize private investment to help with acquisition that would provide drainage for other areas while we create more workforce housing and areas that are more attractive for long-term livability. That's all the type of conversation that's taking place, but there are clearly, there are no documents, but things that we need to start to more actively contemplate.
So briefly for Norfolk, just as we can't build our way out of the problem, you can't buy your way out of it either. And so we've been working with a couple of NGOs in the private sector to see if we can't develop a market-based voluntary system where people will choose because the risk that whatever they're willing to accept, it has gotten beyond what they're willing to accept, and to create opportunities for them to be able to come out of those areas and be relatively whole by tying together conservation easements and creating some value through our zoning process to allow that to happen. We're not all the way there yet. Maybe next year we can come back and talk about how we've implemented. So we got time for one more. And I think I saw a hand in the middle of something. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you all for being here. You're very inspiring, all of you. My question is really to Amanda. 25% of the state of Virginia is in the Albemarle-Pamlico watershed, and Virginia Beach, where I work, 65% of our land area is in the Albemarle-Pamlico and is very much affected by what happens to and in the eastern part of North Carolina. So my question is, how might you envision our two states working together more cooperatively on planning for the Albemarle-Pamlico watershed area?
That is a great question, and actually you could probably say the same thing about South Carolina, because To paraphrase, a lot of the flooding problems in South Carolina come from North Carolina. And so while one of the assets that we have in terms of doing that kind of multi-state planning would be the APNEP, can somebody spell out that?
Help me out.
Yes. We do have some, basically to say, we have some federal support for doing that within a given watershed geography. But right now, we don't have great tools for working across states. And I think that's something that I don't have a great ready answer for, and I would encourage a continued dialogue because particularly with the riverine flooding, it's a shared future. And so what we do in one part of the watershed needs to make sense for the other part of the watershed as well. But policy-wise and planning-wise, how we do that, whether we start at the local level with border communities or whether we try to do state-to-state coordination, I think that's a conversation we need to have.
All right, everyone, please join me in thanking Jennifer, Amanda, and Mark for their presentations and sharing with us.
Great job, everybody.
Thank you.